My beloved child, there is a reason these words feel different from the moment they reach you, because somewhere behind the ordinary rhythm of this day, a conversation has shifted in a way your soulmate did not expect. They had been carrying something quietly, turning it over in their mind, wondering whether telling you would change too much, reveal too much, or finally expose what they have been trying so carefully to keep beneath the surface. But something happened today that made silence feel harder than honesty. And now the words forming inside them are simple: I need to tell you what happened today. Not because something frightening has occurred, and not because you should expect some impossible prediction, but because a moment unfolded that forced them to look directly at feelings they had been avoiding. Don't skip, because the most important part is not what happened around them. It is what happened inside them afterward. There was a moment when your name entered the conversation unexpectedly. Perhaps someone mentioned you, perhaps a memory surfaced at exactly the wrong or strangely right time, perhaps they saw something ordinary that instantly reminded them of you. Whatever triggered it, they could no longer treat what they feel as something distant. Their expression changed. Their thoughts became louder. And beneath everything was one realization they had not prepared themselves to face: you still matter to them in a way they cannot casually explain away. Then came the detail they cannot stop replaying. Someone around them noticed the change. It may have been nothing more than a question: why did you suddenly go quiet? But that question reached deeper than anyone realized. Your soulmate tried to move past it. They gave a small answer, changed the subject, perhaps even smiled as though nothing meaningful had happened. Yet internally, something had already opened. Because sometimes the strongest feelings are not revealed through dramatic declarations. Sometimes they appear in the pause before someone answers, in the name they hesitate to say, in the person their mind reaches for when nobody is asking them to choose. And today, their mind reached for you. Stay till the end, because what happened next is why they now feel such a powerful need to speak. They found themselves remembering a specific moment between you, something you may have assumed they barely noticed. A sentence. A look. A small kindness. The way you understood something without demanding an explanation. They remembered it with startling clarity, and suddenly they began seeing your connection from another angle. They realized that while they had been waiting for certainty, they may have overlooked something far more valuable: the quiet consistency of what they already felt. A strange calm followed that realization. Not the calm of forgetting, but the calm that arrives when someone finally stops arguing with their own heart. Your soulmate began asking themselves questions they had postponed for too long. Why does your presence still feel familiar even after distance or silence? Why do certain memories of you remain untouched while other things fade? Why have they imagined telling you things they have never been comfortable telling anyone else? And one question stayed longer than all the others: what would happen if they simply told you the truth instead of trying to control the outcome? That question changed the atmosphere of their entire day. Something important is waiting for you, because the urgency in their words is not about panic. It is about emotional clarity arriving unexpectedly. They do not want another ordinary day to pass while something meaningful remains unfinished between you. They are beginning to understand that waiting until every circumstance becomes perfect may mean waiting forever for a moment that was never supposed to be perfect. Maybe it only needed to be sincere. But there is another layer, and this is where the story becomes more personal. The thing that happened today reminded them of something you once gave them without realizing its value. You made them feel seen. Not admired from a distance. Not placed on a pedestal. Seen. There is a difference. You notice the quieter version of them, the person beneath the explanations and appearances. And somewhere along the way, they became accustomed to that feeling without understanding how rare it was. Only when circumstances shifted did they recognize what your presence had actually meant. That recognition did not arrive loudly. It arrived almost like a whisper, "Should have told them." Those words stayed. They followed your soulmate through the next hour, then the next. And each time they tried to dismiss the thought, another memory returned, not to torment them, but to clarify something. The connection was never meaningful because everything was flawless. It was meaningful because something genuine existed underneath the confusion. Here is the part they are struggling to put into words: they are not only thinking about what they want to tell you. They are thinking about how you might receive it. They wonder whether you would listen quietly. Whether you would be surprised. Whether you already sensed what they were unable to say. They wonder whether too much time has passed, whether the distance changed you, whether you would recognize the sincerity behind their voice. And beneath those questions is a vulnerability they rarely allow anyone to see. They do not want to arrive with rehearsed perfection. They want to arrive honestly. There is something almost beautiful about that shift, because for perhaps the first time, they are beginning to understand that real connection does not require someone to have every answer before they speak. Sometimes the bravest conversation begins with exactly what they are thinking now. "I don't know how to explain this perfectly, but I need to tell you what happened today." And what happened today was not one enormous event. That is the surprising truth. It was a sequence of small moments that became impossible to ignore. Your name appearing unexpectedly. A memory returning. Someone asking a simple question. A silence that suddenly revealed more than words. Then the realization that their feelings had survived every attempt to organize them into something easier. Your soulmate looked at their day differently after that. They began noticing all the places where they had been holding themselves back, not only from you, but from honesty with themselves. They recognized that protecting themselves from uncertainty had also protected them from possibility. That is why the message feels urgent to them now. Not urgent because something terrible will happen if they wait, but urgent because they finally understand the cost of endlessly postponing meaningful words. Don't skip this next realization, because it may be the quietest and strongest one of all. Your soulmate is beginning to separate love from pride. For a long time, those two things may have become tangled. Pride says, "Wait until they reach out." Fear says, "Wait until you know exactly how they feel." Overthinking says, "Wait until there is no possibility of misunderstanding." But genuine affection asks a much simpler question: what if honesty matters more than being perfectly protected? Today, that question became difficult for them to escape. They started imagining what they would say if you were sitting across from them with no distractions, no outside voices, no pressure to perform. And the first thing was not dramatic. It was almost painfully simple: "There is something I should have told you sooner." Then another thought followed: "You mattered to me more than I showed." And after that came the sentence they are still gathering the courage to complete. That unfinished sentence is where everything changes. Because it is connected to the moment today when someone said something about relationships, timing, or the people we regret not being honest with. Your soulmate heard those words differently than everyone else. The conversation continued, but part of them stayed behind. Their mind went directly to you. They remembered the opportunities they had to speak more openly. They remembered the times they almost sent a message, almost admitted something, almost allowed themselves to be completely transparent. Suddenly, all those unfinished moments seemed connected, as though they had been leading toward one decision: stop hiding behind "someday." Stay till the end, because this is not about promising a perfect ending. It is about something more believable and perhaps more meaningful: the possibility of a real conversation beginning where silence once stood. Your soulmate now understands something about you that they may have misunderstood before. Your quietness was not necessarily indifference. Your boundaries were not necessarily rejection. Your ability to continue living your life did not mean the connection meant nothing. And recognizing this has changed the way they interpret the distance between you. Instead of asking, "Why didn't they chase me?" they are beginning to ask, "Did I ever give them a safe reason to come closer?" That question landed heavily because the answer required them to examine their own choices. They remembered moments when you offered warmth and they responded cautiously. Moments when you opened a door emotionally and they stood in the doorway, uncertain. Moments when you deserved clarity but received hesitation. There is no need for blame here. People sometimes understand the importance of a moment only after it has passed. What matters is what they choose once they understand. And their next choice may surprise you. They are not thinking about arriving with grand promises. They are thinking about telling you one truth at a time. First, what happened today. Then why it reminded them of you. Then what they realized afterward. And finally, the thing they have been protecting most carefully: the real reason they never fully stopped thinking about you. Something important is waiting for you in that final truth, because it is not simply, "I missed you." It goes deeper. Missing someone can come from familiarity. This feels different. They have realized that certain parts of themselves became clearer through knowing you. You reflected something back to them, who they could be when they stopped pretending they needed nothing from anyone. That is why your memory keeps returning during moments of honesty. The room became quieter when they finally admitted this to themselves. There was no audience. No dramatic music. No perfect sign appearing at exactly the right second. Just a person sitting with a truth they had avoided, suddenly unable to make it smaller. And maybe that is what makes this moment powerful. Real emotional turning points often look ordinary from the outside. Nobody else knows that someone has just decided to stop running from a conversation. Nobody sees the internal shift when uncertainty becomes willingness. Nobody hears the private sentence, "I think I need to tell them." Yet those quiet decisions can change everything that follows. Your soulmate is closer to that decision than they were yesterday. They are thinking about the first words carefully, not because they want to manipulate the outcome, but because they want you to understand their intention. They do not want confusion. They do not want games. They want the conversation to feel different from everything that came before. And there is one detail about what happened today that they have not yet fully processed, a detail connected to something another person said immediately after your name came up. It made your soulmate stop completely. For a few seconds, they did not know how to respond, because the person had unknowingly described something about you that your soulmate had been secretly thinking for a long time. That was the moment their silence stopped feeling comfortable. That was the moment they knew this story was no longer only happening inside their mind. And the exact words they heard are still echoing there now, because those words uncovered the one feeling they had never been able to explain, and that is the part they are finally preparing to tell you. The sentence came from someone who had no idea how deeply it would land, some people stay in your heart because you never finished being honest with them. Your soulmate did not answer immediately. For everyone else, it was simply another thought inside an ordinary conversation, something said and then allowed to pass. For them, it felt strangely specific. Your face appeared in their mind before they could stop it. Not because they were trying to romanticize the past, but because those words described exactly what they had been carrying without having a name for it. There was unfinished honesty between you. Things felt but never expressed. Questions considered but never asked. Moments when they wanted to move closer, only to become cautious at the final second. And suddenly the urgency they had been feeling made sense. They were not trying to recreate yesterday. They were wondering whether the truth deserved a chance to exist today. "I need to tell you what happened today," they imagined saying, and for the first time those words did not feel impossible. They felt necessary in the gentlest way. What happened several minutes later surprised them even more. They stepped away from the conversation, hoping a little distance would quiet everything inside them, but the opposite happened. Without other voices around them, their thoughts became clearer. They remembered one particular interaction with you, something so small that you may not even remember it with the same intensity. You had listened. That was all. You had listened when they were struggling to explain something about themselves, and instead of interrupting, correcting, or rushing them toward an answer, you gave them room. At the time, they accepted that moment almost casually. Today they understood it differently. They realized they had felt emotionally safe around you in ways they rarely acknowledged. And that realization raised a difficult question: why had they been so careful with someone who had given them so many reasons to be genuine? Don't skip, because the answer they found was not what they expected. Their hesitation had never been proof that the connection was weak. In some ways, it had been the opposite. You mattered enough that the possibility of getting things wrong felt unusually significant. They could handle casual connections because there was little at stake. With you, every word seemed to carry more weight. So they waited. They analyzed. They convinced themselves there would eventually be a clearer moment. But clearer moments do not always arrive on their own. Sometimes people have to create them by speaking. And today your soulmate began to understand that waiting for certainty had become another form of hiding. Then another memory surfaced. It was not the happiest memory, nor the most dramatic. It was simply honest. There had been a moment when you seemed ready to say something more, and they sensed it. They noticed the slight change in your voice, the pause between your words, the way the conversation seemed to stand at the edge of becoming more personal. Yet they stepped away emotionally. Maybe they changed the subject. Maybe they responded more lightly than they truly felt. Maybe they convinced themselves that keeping things simple was safer. Today, they finally saw that moment from your side. They wondered whether you had walked away thinking they did not care. That possibility stayed with them longer than they expected. A completely different thought arrived next: what if you had been protecting your heart too? That possibility rearranged everything. For so long, they had interpreted your restraint through their own uncertainty. They had wondered whether you were moving on, whether you had stopped caring, whether your silence meant the connection had faded. Now they were considering another explanation. Perhaps two people had been waiting for reassurance from each other while neither wanted to risk being the first to reveal too much. Perhaps the distance between you had been filled with assumptions rather than absence of feeling. They could not know your heart without hearing you speak, and they finally recognized the same truth in reverse. You could never have known theirs if they kept it hidden. Something important is waiting for you, because this was the point when their thoughts moved away from memory and toward action. Your soulmate began imagining a real conversation. Not an idealized reunion where every sentence lands perfectly. A human conversation. One with pauses. One where both people might need time to understand what the other means. One where honesty matters more than performance. They imagined telling you that something happened today which made them reconsider the way they had handled your connection. They imagined admitting that they had been more affected than they showed. Then they imagined simply becoming quiet and giving you space to respond. Strangely, that final part felt more important than anything else. They do not only want you to hear them. They want to hear you. That distinction changed their entire approach. Earlier, they had imagined telling you everything at once, almost as though releasing the truth would solve every unanswered question. Now they understand that your experience matters equally. What did you think during those quiet periods? What did you assume when they became distant? Were there moments when you almost reached out? Were there words you kept to yourself because you did not know whether they would be welcomed? They are beginning to recognize that there may be an entire side of this connection they have never heard. And instead of frightening them, that possibility is making them curious. For the first time, they are less focused on controlling the answer and more interested in discovering the truth. Then their phone became part of the story. They picked it up almost automatically. Your name was somewhere within reach, perhaps in an old conversation, a contact, a memory attached to a photograph, or simply inside their thoughts strongly enough that the screen seemed to become a decision waiting to happen. Their fingers stopped. They considered writing something immediately. Not a long confession. Just enough to open the door. "Can we talk?" felt too vague. "I've been thinking about you," felt incomplete. They wanted the first words to carry the sincerity of what had happened without overwhelming you. And eventually one sentence kept returning, "I need to tell you what happened today." They typed it in their imagination before they typed anything for real. Then came the second sentence, "It made me realize something about us." That was where their courage wavered. Because "us" was a word they had avoided. It acknowledged that whatever existed between you had belonged to both of you, even if neither person had fully defined it. Stay till the end, because what they realized about that word is important. They had spent so much time trying to determine what your connection should be called that they had overlooked what it had actually done. It had changed them. It had challenged the way they communicate. It had shown them where they become guarded. It had revealed how deeply they value being understood. Whatever happens next, those things remain real. And then, unexpectedly, they smiled. Not because everything had suddenly become easy, but because one memory of you interrupted the seriousness. Maybe it was something ridiculous you once said. Maybe a private joke. Maybe the way you laughed when something did not go according to plan. The memory softened them. For several seconds, they stopped analyzing the connection and simply remembered what it felt like to enjoy your presence. That mattered more than they expected. Because love can become distorted when people think only about decisions, labels, timing, and outcomes. Beneath all those questions, there had also been something beautifully uncomplicated. They liked being around you. They liked the way conversations could move from serious to playful. They liked discovering small things about you. They liked the version of themselves that appeared when they forgot to be guarded. That memory gave them a different kind of courage. Not dramatic courage. Quiet courage. The kind that says, maybe I don't need to know the ending before I begin the conversation. Your soulmate started understanding that honesty does not guarantee a particular outcome, but it can create something uncertainty never can: clarity. And clarity is what they are craving now. They would rather understand where you truly stand than continue building possibilities from silence. They would rather give you the chance to know what was real inside them than keep wondering whether you ever understood. But one question remained, and it was the question they could not answer alone: would you still recognize the person they are trying to become? Time changes people. Distance changes perspective. Experiences reveal things. Your soulmate knows they cannot approach you as though nothing happened between then and now. They are not expecting you to remain frozen inside an old memory. In fact, part of what draws them toward this conversation is the possibility of meeting you again as you are now. What have you learned? What has become important to you? What do you no longer accept? What makes you feel peaceful these days? They want to understand the person on the other side of the silence, not simply return to the version of you they remember. That is when something else became clear: they do not want to come back merely because they miss you. Missing someone is not enough. They want to approach you differently because they understand something differently. There is growth hidden inside that distinction. They are beginning to see that meaningful relationships cannot survive on emotion alone. They require communication, consistency, respect, patience, and the willingness to hear uncomfortable truths without disappearing. Today forced them to ask whether they are ready for those things. And surprisingly, their answer was more hopeful than it would have been before. The next moment was almost invisible, yet it may become the most important one. They opened a blank message. They stared at it. They closed it. A few minutes later, they opened it again. This time, instead of trying to write the perfect introduction, they wrote something simpler. Something closer to their actual voice. They read it once. Then twice. Their heart was not racing with fear, it was settling into recognition. These were words they could stand behind. Words without promises they could not make. Words without emotional pressure. Just honesty. But they did not send them yet. There was one more thing they needed to understand first. Because immediately after writing that message, they remembered something you had once told them, something about what you needed from people who wanted to remain close to you. At the time, they heard your words but did not fully understand them. Today, those same words returned with completely different meaning. They suddenly realized you had already told them exactly how to reach you emotionally. You had never demanded perfection. You had asked for something far simpler, and they had been too guarded to recognize its importance. The realization made them look back at the message they had just written. One sentence needed to change. They deleted it slowly and replaced it with words that felt more honest. And when they finished, they stared at the screen because the new sentence revealed far more than they had originally intended. It was no longer only about what happened today. It was about why, after everything, their thoughts still found their way back to you. And the sentence they wrote next may finally explain what they have been unable to say all this time.